As tensions around the world are heating up, Australia's steel industry is melting down. And that could be a big problem for every Australian, not just the few thousand workers at the Whyalla Steelworks. The majority of steel that Australia uses is imported, and it mostly comes from China. If tensions rise further and a conflict breaks out, that source of steel is gone. That means no more rail lines, bridges, rebar for construction, our whole defence manufacturing. Multiple industries our economy depends on will have severe supply issues. And Australia could grind to a halt. Australia's local steel manufacturing industry is on critical life support, with one of only 2 steelworks facilities in Australia on the brink of collapse. So today, let's take a look at Australia's steel industry, the Whyalla Steelworks saga, and why a sovereign steelmaking industry is vitally important for Australia's national security and future economic success. I'm Pikos, and today, we're talking tactics. Steel is the backbone of modern industry. We use it to build bridges, warships, skyscrapers, pipelines. But in 2025, Australia's steel industry is looking more like a rustic relic than a national asset. In 2024, Australia produced just 4.8 million tonnes of crude steel, tiny compared to countries like China, which pumped out over 1 billion tonnes. And most of our capacity comes from just 2 sites: BlueScope's Port Kembla Steelworks in New South Wales and the Whyalla Steelworks in South Australia. Whyalla alone accounts for around 70% of our domestically produced long steel, the steel used in things like rail lines, construction beams, and rebar. That makes it critical infrastructure. With so much reliance on imported steel, it feels like we're standing on pretty shaky ground. Geopolitical tensions. China supplies more than 40% of Australia's steel imports. That includes finished steel products, specialty steels, and critical inputs like rolled coil and steel tubing. If a conflict broke out between Australia and China, even a low-intensity one, you can bet those exports would stop immediately. No Chinese steel equals no more imported beams or cheap reinforcement bars. And the few remaining domestic producers like Whyalla and BlueScope would suddenly have to cover that gap. The problem is, they can't. Not in their current state and not without urgent help. What's going on at Whyalla? Whyalla is one of only 2 integrated steel plants left in Australia. It's old, it's underfunded, and it's been through years of corporate chaos. Once owned by BHP, then spun off to One Steel, it eventually became part of Arium, which collapsed in 2017. The plant was then bought by Sanjeev Gupta's GFG Alliance in a dramatic rescue that saved thousands of jobs. GFG promised a radical transformation, a pivot to green steel, a new electric arc furnace, and the eventual decommissioning of the blast furnace. But progress has been slow, very slow. Then in February 2025, the South Australian government placed the Whyalla Steelworks into administration, citing severe financial instability under its owner, GFG Alliance. The decision was driven by concerns over unpaid debts, underinvestment, and the risk of insolvency, which threatened the continuation of steel production in the region. In fact, before being placed into administration, Whyalla owed creditors over $1 billion. To stabilise operations and protect thousands of jobs, the federal and state governments announced a joint $2.4 billion bailout package. This funding aims to keep the steelworks running while a new owner is sought. Kordamentha, appointed as the administrator, has identified up to a dozen interested parties and aims to secure a sale by the end of 2025. As they try to find a buyer for the facility, they're working to stabilise the plant, including efforts to gain control over the port facilities essential for operations. This needed to happen. If Whyalla fails, Australia loses not just a steel plant, but a strategic asset. And the government needed to step in to make sure that it didn't fail. It also has bipartisan support. And yes, it's good for the thousands of workers in Whyalla that their jobs are being saved, but it's worth more than that. Australia can't let its own steel industry break down. Because in a world where global supply chains are crumbling and great power conflict is on the table, a sovereign steel industry isn't just nice to have, it's essential for our very survival. Green steel. One of the issues that caused Whyalla to get into such dire straits appears to be its attempts to convert to green steel. Very simply, green steel is made by replacing the traditional coal-based blast furnace process with cleaner technologies, most notably using green hydrogen, which is produced via electrolysis powered by renewable energy to remove oxygen from iron ore. This process, known as direct reduced iron, DRI, emits water vapor instead of carbon dioxide. The resulting iron is then melted in an electric arc furnace, which can also run on renewable electricity. In contrast, conventional steelmaking relies on coking coal, otherwise referred to as metallurgical coal, and blast furnaces, which emit large amounts of CO2 during the smelting process. Australia is also the world's largest exporter of coking coal. Green steel significantly reduces emissions, but the technology is still emerging, expensive, and requires large-scale hydrogen and renewable infrastructure that currently doesn't exist at sufficient scale in Australia. Steel plants also need to run 24/7, and so energy reliability is important. It can't be intermittent, and renewables like solar and wind aren't up to the task to power something like this reliably. According to industry analysts, green steel can cost up to 30 to 50% more than traditional steel, and while that premium is expected to drop as technology gets better and cheaper, it's not going to be cheaper in the short term. And that's when we need it. And Australia doesn't yet have the infrastructure to produce green hydrogen at the scale required, with many experts questioning as to whether it's even feasible. The Whyalla $2.4 billion bailout includes $100 million for immediate on-the-ground support, $384 million for stabilising the steelworks and keeping it operational while in administration, and $1.9 billion for investing in the steelworks' future, with a key part of that being the transformation to making green steel. And like I said before, we definitely needed to bail out the steelworks. It's vital to Australia's national and strategic interest, but trying to force green steel production right now, increasing the cost of steel by 30 to 50% when it can't even stand on its own 2 feet without being bailed out, just doesn't seem like the best thing to do with our tax money, in my opinion. Setting aside the fact that Australia doesn't even have a green hydrogen industry, a key component of creating green steel, it's going to be decades before green steel is economically viable. And with Whyalla on the verge of falling apart completely, now's not the time to be trying to push this through. We need to keep our steel cheap to produce in order to compete with China. This $2.4 billion needs to be spent on shoring up the current steelworks, building it back up to capacity, and keeping it running smoothly, and then expanding it to increase Australia's local steelmaking industry, reducing our reliance on Chinese steel. We've heard again and again that President Xi has told the PLA to be ready to take Taiwan in 2027. If that happens and a conflict breaks out, there goes our steel, and we're going to need Whyalla and also BlueScope's Port Kembla Steelworks to step up. They shouldn't be hamstrung with pie-in-the-sky goals and expensive manufacturing processes when they're in such a vulnerable position, particularly when they're also supplying such key industries like our defense industry during the time of a conflict. Takeaways. Let's bring this together. China supplies most of our steel imports. And if conflict breaks out, Australia's supply will be cut off almost overnight. That would leave us dangerously exposed with only two major producers to rely on, one of which, Whyalla, is already on the brink. Whyalla provides around 70% of our domestic long steel, the kind needed for construction, transport, and defence. If it fails, Australia loses critical industrial capacity. This is not just about saving a few thousand jobs. We don't just need to save it, we need to expand it. Government investment, strategic protection, dare I say it, tariffs, whatever it takes to prop up our steel industry. Green steel is a noble goal and one that I do actually support in the long run. But the technology isn't ready and the costs are just too high. We need to support the industry, not give it roadblocks. Steel is not just about economics. It's about sovereignty. It's about being able to build, to defend, and to stand on our own 2 feet in a dangerous world. But what do you think? Should the Australian and South Australian governments have bailed out the Whyalla Steelworks? Should we be investing more into local steel manufacturing? And do you think green steel is vital or too complex right now? Should we be placing tariffs on steel imports to Australia? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And if you're new here, welcome. I talk about infrastructure, military projects, and politics, so if that interests you, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next video. And if you enjoyed this one, please hit the like button. It really helps me out. But that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I'm Pikos, and we've been talking tactics.